Everybody, how you doing? It's Friday, September 1st. Ructions. Here we are. Marc Ross, good friend Gerald Ashley. Gerald, how's it going?
Not bad. 1st of September. I'm reliably informed by people who understand these things. This is the first day of autumn. Seems slightly depressing. I also think it's slightly odd. It seems a bit formulaic to suddenly say yesterday was summer and today is autumn. And it also seems to ignore the equinoxes, which is how I thought we always dealt with things. But anyhow, situation normal here in the UK, a bit of sunshine and plenty of rain, and people enjoying complaining about it.
Do you want to chat about Grant Shapps, who, only reason I find this guy interesting, he's now in his 5th cabinet position in 12 months' time.
Um,
Either is he a
yeah,
really good cabinet official, or can you just do these jobs for 2 months and just move on?
I mean, this now just illustrates one of my favourite topics, and I will try to, not be on my soapbox too long about this, but it just shows the whole uselessness of the system. I mean, within his five different job roles, one of which was as Home Secretary, which in the UK government system is one of the great three offices other than Prime Minister. And he was Home Secretary for 6 days. I mean, and that is, needless to say, a record. And in fact, it made me go back and look at records of how long ministers have been in various jobs. And rare is the Home Secretary who's been there more than 2 years in the last 30 years. The idea that somebody would be in post for an entire administration and government seems to have completely gone. Quite what this achieves, shuffling people around, Lord only knows. I think actually what in the States you call what inside the Beltway and we call the Westminster Village,
Right.
e- even the political nerds are bored by this. How can you get remotely excited by any of this? But to me, it's got a sort of end of, fin de siècle, sort of end of empire kind of end of regime feel to it. And I don't mean just the end of the Tory government. I think we're going to have to seriously address how the hell we run the government and how the interaction between Whitehall and Westminster goes. Of course, nobody wants to do that, so nothing will happen. I don't think it'll happen until we have a few more years of this. But it's you
Well,
know
yeah, for the uninitiated, Whitehall is, yeah, like essentially the bureaucracy, the unelected civil servants, and it would
yeah.
seem that if you can switch jobs so easily, that bureaucrats and civil servants are really running the show, which is, I don't know, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but you're right. I mean, proper revolution, proper Whitehall,
Well, how could you
new
possibly
government.
learn a brief in any serious job in government in under 6 months?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to be really on the case all day long, and you need 6 months to get up to speed. The whole thing's a complete farce. I think it suits the civil servants quite well.
No, I
They
would
just
imagine
want
so, because
jobs
they would
done.
be, yeah, because they would probably be like, oh yeah, come and go. These guys come and go. It doesn't really matter. I think what's interesting in our system, the cabinet. So we have, I don't know, I should probably know, I don't know, 17 agencies, let's say, and our cabinet is actually made up. The president gets to appoint,
Yeah.
so they usually are subject matter experts, running these departments. Of course, there's some political appointments, but it's interesting. Your system, they've got to select from whoever they've got, whoever's been an elected MP, regardless of the skill set.
Well, yes and no. Not in theory. I could get the call from Mr. Sunak at any
Oh,
moment.
interesting.
But for that to work, I've got to be able then to present as a minister to the Houses of Parliament. And the occasional dodge that has been used is to shove somebody in the House of Lords. But there again, they tend to be in relatively minor roles. So sometimes we've had trade, import, export experts have come into the Ministry of Trade and they've come via the House of Lords.
I wasn't. So you have to be a member of the parliament to be a
Yes.
minister. So but you could be sent to
Um,
the House of Lords. But you could be sent to the House of Lords. Does that count?
I'm on thin ice now because I think, like a lot of things in Britain, this is not actually written down anywhere. It's just my sort of convention and what's happened in the past. In theory, in go medieval terms, King Charles can ring me up and ask me to be prime minister. I think the practicalities of that are somewhat remote and unlikely, be
Well,
honest.
maybe we should clear the lines though. Should we end this call so in case he
I'm
calls, you
sure
don't miss it?
if he wants to find us, I'm sure he can.
All right. Speaking of wanting to find us, coups, revolutions, not only in potentially Whitehall, but in Africa, the Sahel region, West Africa. I just saw this stat since 1990, 2/3 of coups in Africa have happened in former French colonies. Gerald, what is going on in Africa? Break it down for
Well,
us. What's going on in West Africa?
well, I think we can indulge in a certain amount of self-congratulation because we kind of flagged this about just a little over a year ago on our predecessor's show, and we talked about the Sahel and just kind of look out, and it seems to be blowing up again. It would appear that, and I don't think there's a particular French angle on this one, but it would appear that a lot of these countries, essentially, although they left what was the former French Empire, they were client states of France. They were in a form of monetary union called the CFA franc. They had very strong economic ties with France, and France, to be frank, um, provided a lot of defence and military resources to these countries. Um, However, as is often the case, I'm afraid, we've ended up with a bunch of uh, so called elected heads of government, some of whom have been in for decades, with all sorts of, dubious elections have taken place. And every now and again, you sort of a sort of safety valve pops maybe, and we get a coup. This time it seems more concentrated. I wonder if it might be to do with the commodity cycle. If commodity prices start to recover and go up again, and China starts to show more and more interest in that part of Africa. I mean, they're already big in further south. Um, then that may be a lot that's driving all of this. Um, so I don't think it's just pure politics. It's like a lot of these things. It's probably all down to money, and who's going to fund things. And then just to chuck into the mix, um, we mustn't forget the characters of the Wagner group,
Right.
who still seem to be roaming around. And who's funding that, who's controlling it, let alone knowing what's going on. So it's a bit of a mess. And I think from a French perspective, I suspect that they just wish it would all go away. They're kind of saddled with all of this because now the West is turning to France saying, look, this is a mess in your backyard. What are you going to do about it? And in fact, they've been steadily withdrawing rather than getting more involved. And so I don't think they'd want to get back involved. Watch this space. We could get very messy, I think, actually.
No, 100%. I think you're spot on. I do think the West has basically outsourced this responsibility to France, and France is taking it on for various reasons. And so I'm not entirely sure if it's a reflection in France losing power or of Russia and China collaborating to take advantage of a situation based on commodities, which I think are super important. I think most of the world that China sees is really based on commodities. I think the Ukraine conflict
No.
is definitely got a huge commodity component, as we've talked about. So, but it's interesting because now it's reached a point when you got 5 or 6 countries shifting. Military's taking over. Who's running? Also, it's interesting in Niger, the U.S.'s military bases, and I guess our government, the U.S. government, is refused to label this a coup because legally, when it's labeled a coup, other actions happen. So,
Right.
which the French are disappointed about, and I guess the European foreign ministers met yesterday. And, because there's also the issue of immigration from that region, which pours into Africa. So,
Yeah.
very, very interesting. Certainly a spot to watch. But all the big players are involved, but nobody really seems to have a solution. And also, it doesn't seem like anybody's really honestly talking about it. I mean, the Russians are saying, "Oh, we got nothing to do with this." The Chinese are amazingly silent on this, which suggests there's something really happening, but nobody's
Yeah,
really stepped up to figure out what to do.
there's a lot of smoke and mirrors mainly. One other little element to chuck into this is, and I think we talked about this last year, yellow cake uranium, which is big in that part of the world, I think particularly in Chad. And that is a key commodity for the much vaunted, or much hoped for in my case, nuclear power. But you can only have nuclear power if you've got uranium, and that is again an important source of it. Um, I wonder if this might spread a little bit, because the rest of Africa has obviously got a lot of resources and their economies are very reliant on it, right the way through from Nigeria right down to South Africa. They're much bigger countries, and they probably can handle themselves better, for whatever better phrase. But the Chinese have been very active in a number of countries, Mozambique, Angola, etc.
Yeah,
And
Sudan for
it,
sure.
this is kind of not. I know we always go for historic things, but this is kind of 19th century um, geopolitics again in Africa, isn't it? The scramble for Africa. It's like, in the 1940s or 1950s, they kick out the French, kick out the British, and a small amount of the Portuguese. Even the Germans had a couple of colonies. That's all gone. We're going to go for nation states. Well, it all seems to be back now, with not in quite such a obvious way, but certainly in terms of sphere of influence. And I don't see the West, with the exception of the United States, having much chance of influencing things. To be honest, I think
What's interesting is the scale of it. So I just looked this up because there's 55 nations in Africa, which is just a mind-blowing number. And then sub-Sahara Africa, there are 46. So there's no reason to see why this can't spread. Having that many different governments, that many different personalities, that many people to control, pretty wild situation. I would have to think it's only gonna get worse, not before it's gonna
yeah,
get
I
better.
think
I mean, I
it's
can't
right.
see like this stopping anytime soon.
No, and there are a number of, to use the phrase, bad actors that that kind of suits. And there may be some unusual names that we haven't thought of, names like Iran and Turkey, who may not be directly involved, but again have got important needs for those commodities for their own um, energy and military purposes. So there are a large number of people who, are not anything remotely to do with the West, who are very interested in that part of the world. So it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, and if you're competing for the future of the world, I mean, from a big power standpoint, much better for it to happen in Niger than the suburbs of Seattle, so to speak. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I think this is definitely an interesting must-watch situation. I think we're going to be learning a lot more about Africa, and I think the French. It'll be interesting to see how much responsibility they have going forward, and if Macron, in the dying years of his presidency, wants to take this on, or does he shift? He's got a lot of domestic problems. Interesting spot to watch.
Yeah,
That's
I
all we can
agree.
say. We have no solutions other than watch this space.
No, but I think, as we said last year, watch it, and now I think we'll watch it more closely, and we'll be back to it more frequently.
So let's talk about speaking of watching, McConnell, the great senator from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, looked like he had his second seizure or some kind of freezing situation this week. It gets to the age issue in the United States. You also have Senator Feinstein of California. She's quite old as well, and she's bedridden in a wheelchair. We've got a lot of old people running the U.S.
Well,
government.
I think you're being
What's the view from the outside?
I think you're being slightly gentle in saying quite old. I think Dianne Feinstein is 93. I mean, I would be very happy to get to 93. At a personal level, you think you must feel sorry for these individuals in one sense, unless they are so manically, egomaniacally driven to want to do it. I mean, why on earth do you want to be in the Senate at the age of 93? I can't imagine she would be homeless. It seems extraordinary to me. And then, as an outsider, and no doubt you will correct me very quickly on this, it feels like a little bit like old style machine city hall politics here, that you get your man or woman in and you just keep them there. And, whether it is there's a lack of confidence in the next set of people can sit in that place, I don't know, but it is quite extraordinary, really.
Well, I think there's two challenges. Well, there's three, I think. We do have this general philosophy that the people should have the right to choose whoever they want, right? So it's like pure form democracy. If, literally, if the people of Kentucky, if this is who they want to send to the Senate, and this is who they want as their senator, more power to them.
Sure.
Where it becomes complicated is this guy has got a leadership role. Any kind of national security situation, McConnell will be involved in. The special interest is interesting because it's not so much the senator, right? It's like the staff members who are modeled into the system. It's those staff members that have gone out to work for special interests, especially that are dependent for those states, California, Kentucky, etc.
Right.
I think to me, that's what's always interesting. It's like the whole ecosystem. If you've been in power for 20, 30 years, you've employed thousands of people who've gone on to different jobs and they're marbled into the system. And there are people that are hired solely because they have a relationship with a senator. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. And the third thing is like, who do you put in there, right? Like, especially in California, there's 3 or 4 other people that would love that job. So, and then in Kentucky, what's interesting, there's a Democrat senator. So if McConnell left, the Democrat would appoint. So, I mean, part of it's just like, I got to keep this job because I don't want the other side to take over. None of this looks good, but that's like the raw politics of it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think your point number two is particularly interesting because this is a little bit like the power of patronage, and this is something we suffer from in the UK. Boris Johnson, you may just about recall him. He's put somebody in the House of Lords who's 30. Now you could say, okay, let's have some young people in, but given that the House of Lords, in theory, um, is supposed to be people who've kind of been around the block a bit, and it seems very difficult to say that is the case with this particular lady who has really only worked in a political office, and so I mean, it does smack of patronage. Um, so my question as an outsider to you, Mark, is there going to be a grand reckoning here and a load of, you know, without being distasteful, some people are going to die, but I mean, is there going to be a big shake-up and get rid of a lot of these people, or not?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think they're gonna have to. I don't see them leaving for ego, and I mean, I was talking to a cabinet official that worked for H.W. Bush, and she was like, "Listen, man, when you get these jobs, like Biden, for example, has wanted to be president for decades, and if he finally got it, for the idea that he's gonna suddenly give up that power."
Yeah.
It just comes down to pure ego. And there's this idea, like, I think, and you could post rationalize anything, right? I think if you're elected official, you'd be like, this is what the people want. They sent me here. I've got a job to do. You can tell yourself anything. But the dynamic of the age issue, there's a lot of complaining about it. Everybody knows it's a problem, but nobody really wants to do anything about it. And speaking of the presidency, like Trump and Biden, Bill Clinton is younger than both those guys, right?
Yeah.
So it's as if like Clinton was president in his 50s, right? Now he should be the idea like he should be president now. I don't know. I don't know if it's just like a cycle thing or it's a phase but it doesn't seem energetic from the outside, right? It does seem like we've just kind of given up on democracy.
It just seems warming to one of my other great themes these days, that it's just an insider's game, and that we're being increasingly reduced to being spectators, although I should say tax-paying spectators. And I don't know if that's a common feeling yet. I think it's probably a minority feeling. But you once getting the feeling, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always wins. And we've got a similar situation, I think, in the UK. Not from an age perspective, but from the fact that everybody is completely interchangeable. We just talked about Grant Shapps. Well, he could easily sit in the Labour Party. He could easily sit in the Liberal Democrats. Um, wasn't it Groucho Marx who said, "If you don't like my principles, don't worry, I've got some other ones here." And I'm afraid, this is Groucho Marx politics. There you go.
Well, yeah, one of my favorite sayings too is like the gravity of DC is undefeated, right? You're spot on. Like the United States government, not only does it have its own territory, like it's always going to survive, whether it has 50
Yeah.
states, 10 states, 20, like 100 states, it's going to survive. You can come and go. Um, it's a good reminder too, even like when DeSantis was causing all that trouble with Disney, right? I mean,
Yeah,
Florida governors come and go, right? But
yeah.
Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney, they're like immortal. So you have these like institutions in place that just kind of go along. I think what's interesting on the other side too is I was like Macron, I don't know if you saw that, he got together all the 11 or 12 parties
Yes.
together. They met off site. And I was reading the report this morning, and they broke at like 3 in the morning, right? And they were saying that Macron could have gone on to 6, like he was just like they were talking about all these different topics. And but here's the guy, Macron, who's only 45, has all the energy in the world, but doesn't like have the government or doesn't have the size or the reach to really do what he can do, right? He's like kind of hampered in. Um, I don't know.
I think,
Maybe it's a
well,
bigger issue that the U.S. you have to be born here to be president, right? I don't know. Maybe it's time we got rid of that and anybody can run to be president of the United States as long as they're a citizen,
well,
I
this
suppose.
is step forward, Mr. Schwarzenegger, isn't it? If
Right.
there you go, I'm sure he'd be on a ballot very quickly. You might say it's quite interesting that you kind of put in the two-term presidency after FDR to sort of stop a sort of permanency or monarchical type situation develop. But as you say, that's an interesting statistic. I guess I knew it, but I hadn't really thought about it. Bill Clinton is that bit younger than either the front
Yeah.
runners. What do you do? I don't know. All I do fear for is that these sort of things can only rumble on so long before um, the great masses get upset about things. And if you look at the economics in the United States of the average sort of blue collar worker, they are no better off in real terms than they were 30 years ago. And at some point, and it's not dissimilar in the UK. I wonder at what point people are going to get really fed up with this. I don't think we're quite there, but we're heading in the wrong direction, I feel.
Yeah. What I get nervous about too is like we just talked about all these different skirmishes or, the amount of kit and alliances and partnerships are being formed in the Indo-Pacific, these skirmishes in Africa, like what's Turkey up to? MBS in Saudi Arabia wants to do some stuff. I mean, if things break, I don't know. Do you want an 80-year-old guy, 80-year-old plus guy in charge of all these decisions? What's interesting, like the World War II example, it really didn't matter who was in the government, frankly. I mean, it mattered, but like things were so much slower. But once you introduce the nuclear weapon and you only have minutes to decide how to, counter respond, that changes the dynamic immensely. And it does seem you need a much more vigorous government. But here we are. I don't know. It could be the system itself. I don't know. Maybe reflecting, we're in it right now, but I don't know. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this is the way the system is designed, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think things rumble on, but that's all well and good. Until people get to the stage where they think, well, what on earth are we achieving here? And I think having Mr. Shapps, talented fellow as he must be, having 5 different jobs in 12 months, managing one of the great states or great offices rather of the UK state for 6 days. Um, I mean, if that's not an alarm bell, I don't know what the hell is, to be honest.
I'm desperate to see his CV or his resume. I mean, is
Must
he
be
going to
about
list?
40, must be about 40 pages long.
Is he going to list all 5 jobs? I mean, what's he going to say in his next interview? I see here you were had this job for 6 days. Can you explain why you left after day 7?
Job done. Job done. It's got a slightly religious element to it, isn't it? And on the 7th day, I rested.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Always the wordsmith, always spinning the right story. All right, let's go to the other side of the world. The Fukushima power plant, water treatment. The Japanese have cleaned up some water. It's got some radioactive principles in it, and they're going to pour this stuff into the Pacific Ocean for decades. Most of Japan's allies are cool with it. The International Atomic Energy Agency and other global branches have approved this, but the Chinese are quite annoyed, and the fact they've blocked the importation of Japanese seafood into China. So I don't know if you saw the other day, the Prime Minister of Japan eating sashimi on TV, saying everything is safe. Here we are, nuclear, also China, environment. This story to me is interesting because it has all the components of like where we're going to go as a world, like what kind of energy we're going to use. Of course, nuclear has got challenges, but can be mitigated. Also, Japan, China, that relationship, seafood, just the soft power of eating seafood on television. It has everything you could want.
It's the perfect Venn diagram for you, I think, actually, Mark. And yeah, I take all of the points at a personal level. I just think that if reasonable scientific analysis suggests there's no great problem with this water or no problem at all, I don't see an issue. I think the Japanese government have, again, I suppose they felt they were in a between a rock and a hard place in the sense that they don't want to have their nuclear policy completely dictated to by outside groups, particularly environmentalist sort of activists and NGOs and all the rest of it. But they want to be able to get on with things. But equally, I'm sure they were aware the moment they do it, they're giving China a stick to beat them with, which President Xi has very swiftly picked up on. I can't imagine the Chinese give two hoots about what water is going in to the Sea of Japan, but it's just another little bit of way of poking the Japanese with a stick. Um,
No, and
what
it's
it,
been liberating too. The Chinese have been interesting because they've also used this to getting back to nuclear testing, the stuff the Americans did in the various Pacific atolls, and the Chinese are partnering up with like the Solomon Islands and others and saying, hey, these Western imperialists, they treated you poorly, they blew up all these nuclear weapons, what did they do to
it's an
you?
interesting sales pitch, isn't it? Because you
Yeah.
say, um, get rid of Western imperialism. Why don't you have a go with some of our Chinese imperialism instead? Um, and I think, in a way, I think it's a bit of a non-story. It's a big story on social media, probably, and there'll be people writing letters to newspapers. But will this be a story in 6 months' time? I kind of doubt it. But I think the wider point you make is that there are these points of friction all the time now. And, if it's not seafood, it's going to be about these Chinese artificial islands. If it's not that, it's going to be all the border disputes that China has still got, primarily with India. There's even a border dispute with Vietnam that sort of kind of gets forgotten about. And just to add into the mix, of course, you've got the sort of naughty child in Pyongyang in North Korea, which the Chinese have played the card, look, we're the only guys who can handle this guy. And again, that's just very useful for China because, you upset them and they say, they just let, you know, um, whatever he is now, the dear leader or the supreme leader, they give him a couple more yards on his lead to let him do a few things. And everybody knows that it's China that probably keeps that regime on the road, and it suits them. So this whole area is well, it's dangerous, basically. I think.
Well, it's dangerous, and yeah, there's just constant prodding and friction. Like even today, I don't know if you saw this. The Pope Francis is in Mongolia, right? And you could, what's interesting, there are more Catholics in China, whether they're practicing officially or not, than anywhere in the world. And there is a Chinese bishop, but it's been approved by the communists, but overseen by the Vatican. It's very interesting, like that dynamic. And then the map situation, you're right. Even this week, India, there's a new map that was out. India's like appalled with it. But on the same day, Malaysia and Taiwan also said, hey, like, we don't approve these maps. And it's just like these constant irritation. It's like China's a really interesting country because it's trying to do something. It's trying to create its spot in the world, but it's also creating friction. And as you know, your foreign minister James Cleverly is over there, and the media is like, "Why are you talking to the Chinese?" And I think he rightly said, we can't disengage from China. You may not like everything, but we got to find a way to work with these people, and it's not going to be easy. But it's just this constant friction until once you build so much friction, is a spark going to be lit, and is there going to be some problems?
Yeah, so I'm afraid this is another dystopian episode of this podcast, isn't it? But I mean, it's not. It's difficult to see. I wouldn't say it's a big catastrophic area yet, but it's as you say, it's all these endless tensions, and it's not easy to undo those. Maybe trade will be the way that helps in all of this, but we'll see.
It does seem. I mean, I don't know. Is it? Do you? I generally do feel like there's more tension in the world since COVID, for various reasons. I don't know. It's been. I would think about like the 2008 Olympics, Beijing. George Bush is there. This is big China's celebration party. And then where we are, 15 years later, it's a totally different world. And 15
Yeah.
years really isn't that much time, but like something has changed. People have said, "Hey, we're going to go a different direction." There's a lot more friction, a lot more tension.
Yeah, and there's a lot. You could say the balance of power in the Pacific is slightly tilted. I made the comment a couple of shows ago, to your horror, that was the real problem the United States had, was that they couldn't actually dominate the Pacific anymore, so that they actually needed Japan and all the rest of it. And so the sort of post 1945 territory had changed. I mean, certainly what has changed is self-evident. Israel knows that it's the growth, economic and military power of China. I would also caution against people being frightened of China. They're not. I don't think they're the superpower they think they are. They're kind of a serious power now. I mean, they're easily the second most, the most serious power after the United States. So Russia is, unless they were to use nuclear weapons. I mean, to me, they look like a paper tiger. But India's on the growth. But China is very big, very important, and growing. But as we've said before, and no doubt we'll say again in the future, they're about to hit a brick wall with demographics. Now that doesn't matter for the first 5-10 years, but as we sail into the 2030s, if we all manage to get there, the balance of power or things will maybe ebb slightly against them, or at least their rate of growth will start to stall. And so the worrying part of that is, does President Xi think he's got his window of opportunity now, particularly with Taiwan? Is it a now or never situation in the next 5 years? This is all rather depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, and getting back to you were saying about the U.S. Since you made those crazy comments about U.S. losing its standing in the Asia Pacific, I've seen 5 things I want to share with you. The U.S. is negotiating more military bases in the Philippines. They're sending more weapons to Taiwan. Their U.S. Space Force, which we have, is going to set up a branch in Japan. And I saw 2 other interesting factoids. The Air Force promises more bases. No numbers, no concrete, but more bases. And then the Pentagon has this plan for autonomous weaponry that will combat China. Sounds very PowerPoint friendly, but I don't know. It's all China, and the more you talk about this stuff, you just wonder if you're going to talk yourself into something silly. But let's talk about something fun to finish up, shall we?
Why not? We need it.
Tim, your boy, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple. I don't know if you're following this. The iPhone 15. Can you believe it? There's been 15 of these devices. The iPhone 15. They're going to have an event on September 12th. Are you excited for the new iPhone 15?
No. You would have thought they would have got it right by now. Why do they need 15 versions? That's a kind of cheap remark. There's obviously been a huge development of the technology. The fascinating thing is that a lot of people, and I suppose in a minor way, people like me, have thought, oh, this can't carry on at this rate. People said the same thing about Microsoft, and they came back bigger and stronger, and they said the same thing about Amazon. I think the interesting thing about Apple is, and we're back to China again, there's a lot of people saying, well, at the end of the day, they're just flogging a brand, and a generic kit and equipment will come along and eat their lunch. And it just hasn't happened. They've proven a point in financial markets or in business in general that if you allow your product to be commoditized, eventually you go out of business. So they've constantly driven to the premium end of the market, but a large slice of the market that feels they're in the premium end. So I don't have any Apple products, but then I'm a shareholder, not directly, but through some funds. And so it's in my interest that they do well. Um, and there's a slightly wider point, well, it's a narrow point actually, is that a lot of US stock market growth, which has surprised quite a few people this year, um, is very narrowly based. We're talking 20 or 30 main companies that are driving all the growth and all the income increases and stock increases in the stock market. Um, past past history teaches us, or maybe it won't teach us, that narrowly based advances in bull markets, are not good. You need the broad market to move, or if you like, you need the broad economy to move. And there it seems things are much more sluggish. But yeah, no, Apple keep going. Nvidia, people said it was insane whenever it was 6 weeks ago when the price flew up. It came back a bit, and it's still extremely strong. And so, this all goes on. There are there are parallels. There may be a parallel with the 1960s with something called the Nifty 50, and the wheels fell off that for external reasons. A lot of it to do with dollar coming off a gold standard and all the rest of it, and the oil price shocks and everything. So these, trees don't grow to the sky, but at the moment, these companies continue to drive all the growth.
I'm with you in the same boat. I am a proud Android user, Samsung, etc., Google, and but obviously you've got Apple somewhere in funds and whatnot. And I was at the Apple store, one of the DC stores last week, a few weeks ago. It's an unbelievable store. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I felt like I was in a country club. Just spectacular, sublime, beautiful, beautiful people, beautiful setting. Like equipment, everything is just like perfect. It is amazing what they've done as a company, and it'll be fascinating to see if they can keep it going like everything else. I'm also interested in is you're right about just the concentration of these companies. And I don't know if the media, right? I think about like CNBC or Bloomberg, they can only really talk about well-known brands because they're television shows, right? So, and
Yeah.
they never really talk about like penny shares or biotech companies or quote unquote riskier investments, right? They do talk about blue chip, well-known brands. Not only because they do this, I've been told because that's what the audience wants, and they don't want to start hawking like more riskier investments, right? And it's stuff people understand. And I'm just wondering if this concentration of just talking about the same companies is also it has to influence where investors are spending money. Like the marketing of the stock and the earned
Well,
media around a stock
yeah.
has to be driving some of this.
The other factor, of course, is indexation. The fact that increasingly people are in passive funds, and passive funds, by definition, are in the most market capitalization stocks, and the
Right.
ones that appear to be extremely liquid and successful, and all the rest of it. And winners continue to grow in size, and losers are kind of chucked out the bottom of the ETF or fund or whatever it may be, the tracker fund as we would call them in the UK. Now that's all well and good, but there's a lot of passive money there that hasn't indulged in any thinking. And the thinking, such as it is oh, I don't need to worry about the stock market because all I do is I invest in an index, which, if
Right.
you total returns and reinvesting, it just kind of always goes up. Well, that's all going to be fine and good until you get a point where there's a serious crash. Now, one goes back again, ancient history, I suppose, the crash of 87. But if we had the degree of indexation and tracking that we have now, I think that, the crash would have been even greater. And a large
Hmm.
number of people are in the stock market without the slightest idea of knowing what they're doing. And in fact, they actually make a that's seen as a benefit. That shows, oh, I don't need to worry about that. I know stocks and shares go up and down, and I know the index goes up and down, but net, this will always work. Well, I think that's fine. But if we get to a point where passive funds become a huge part of the liquidity of the market, you have to be worried. Are we there yet? No, probably not. But the direction of travel has been quite dramatic over the last 10 or 15 years.
I think too, like I just thought of this, like the idea, like this is almost a full circle situation where Whitehall and kind of inside the Beltway bureaucrats, will always win, always come and go. What's interesting, I think here in the States, anyways, you're seeing more people start companies with a goal, the specific goal of being acquired by a big, multinational, right? Like they don't want to go through. They want to get to a certain point, get noticed by Microsoft and be bought. They don't want to like compete with Microsoft. They want to be bought by Microsoft. And I'm wondering if that has to also change the economics.
I just wonder if that can continue now that the era of cheap money has gone.
Yeah,
I mean, this all made perfect sense. When you could borrow money virtually for free,
right.
and you can't. And these companies also now, the acquiring companies, have to be a little bit more discerning in who they buy, because there are alternative investments in terms of, there's a real rate of return on government bonds and all the rest of it. Whether that will have a huge impact, I don't know. But I think we get these cycles, and we seem to be in a dramatically long cycle of as you say, minnows hoping to be bought up by big fish.
Well, that hope, like that's literally like, yeah, the business model, right? Like
Yeah,
they're not even like saying we're going to compete. Or my ex is dependent on
it's
Redmond.
kind of interesting, isn't it, that the business model is no longer make a better mousetrap. It seems to be about make a mousetrap that I can flog to Amazon or flog to Nvidia or whatever. It's obviously got to be quite good and it's got all
Yeah,
the rest of it, but we seem to have gone away from maybe that sort of homespun American idea of the solo entrepreneur that does turn into a Goodyear or a Firestone or
yeah.
a Gillette or whoever it may be. Um, granddaddy of them all, Henry Ford. That seems to have gone away. Actually, maybe it's on the basis when nobody's doing it. Maybe that's the time to start looking at it.
Yeah, no, I think it's something to watch. I think we're foreshadowing something, hopefully positive.
Let's hope we can make some money out of it.
Money's only useful when you need it.
Like oxygen, when you got it, you don't notice. When you haven't got it, you can't think about anything else.
Spot on. All right. Speaking of can't think about anything else. What are you reading and watching?
Well, I'm back on the book that viewers, listeners, whatever, with reasonable memories from the beginning of the year. I thought I would revisit this book, The World, by Simon Sebag Montefiore. Why am I back? Well, let me just give you the side-on view. It's 1,300 pages, and it's not one of these books where half the book is the index. The index is kind of like, the index is about that much. In fact, I haven't even got to the index. I'm on the conclusion. So this is an enormous book. It's an excellent book, but I've kind of changed my view on it slightly. And I thought originally I had the slightly uh, ludicrous idea I was going to sit down and read it. In the sense I was going to read it from one end to end. I'm sure there are people who do that, but you do kind of have to put the rest of your life on hold for a few weeks on the basis it's 1,300 pages or whatever it is. But my view on it now is it's actually, and read quite a bit of it on and off. It's quite thematic and it's quite good to sort of dip into particular slices or sections. So if you want to kind of bone up on understanding where China came from or what's going on in other parts of Asia, or why is South America never features so much in history in the past, and maybe it ought to, and all the rest of it, then I think it's an excellent book. So it's still an absolutely excellent book. Quite where he finds the time to write all this stuff, I have no idea. How on earth do you have time to write a 1,300-page book? I mean, I haven't done a word count on this, but are we, a couple of 100,000, maybe more words?
I suspect that audio and transcribing is heavily involved.
Ah,
It's easier
so
to speak than to type,
so
but
the
I could be
next
wrong.
the next book is going to be AI generated, perhaps.
No. I think he probably. I mean, I would guess that it's easy. He's probably spoken on all these topics, lectures, whatnot. I don't know. That's my guess, but
Yeah, I mean, just
not
from
that
a
he doesn't know the knowledge, but I think I'm just talking about the process instead of typing. He
yeah,
may speak into a
and it's
device.
in fairness to him, and in fact, hats off to him. It's incredibly detailed. You can just pretty much open this book at one page, and there's a lot of dense, interesting facts. It doesn't feel like it's padded out.
Yeah.
And for people who are not familiar at all with this book, he's basically looking at the history of the world through the prism of families. So you've obviously had medieval barons, Chinese emperors, Roman emperors, people you and I have never heard of, remote kings of Persia and things like this. And it's extremely interesting. But he does weave it all together very well. But the idea it's a take it on holiday and read it as a book, I think, well, apart from anything else, you'd have to have it as excess baggage. I mean, the
Well,
thing.
unless you're traveling by private train or private jet. I mean, come on.
There again, you see, I'm not living in your world. You see. On moving on then from that. So just to give the plug, it's called "The World: A History" by Simon Sebag Montefiore. Obviously recommended, but it ain't a light read. In terms of what I'm watching, I think I do get criticised from time to time here, be wallowing in past history. So I'm going to do a small bit of wallowing again. For a film which I don't know if it was ever particularly successful in the United States, but certainly did well in the UK, and it's very much a UK theme. It's called The Man Who Would Be King, and it's based on a Rudyard Kipling tale of late Victorian British India. It stars the late Sean Connery and Michael Caine, and directed by one of the great directors, the American John Huston, who had had it as a project for donkey's years. In fact, one stage he wanted to get Humphrey Bogart to do it back in the 50s, but it didn't come out until 1975. It's one of these kind of rollicking, daring do uh, sort of exotic adventure films. It's extremely well done, and I think it's worth rescuing it slightly. So if people have not heard of it, I would recommend it.
Love it. I'm going back to the library. These are much thinner books.
Ah, good.
I mean, they're more like pamphlets. But this is Algorithms to Live By, which
Right.
talks
Okay.
about, decision making problems, how
Right.
humans think, both I guess mentally and with technology. But it's a great book, great vignettes, great stories, well worth the read. Which is helpful to me. It was great to learn about obviously how the mind works, how we think, and then how they've used that process and put that into software. So
Who's the author, Mark?
the author is Brian Christensen and Tom Griffiths,
Right.
and the subtitle is The Computer Science of Human Decisions. So it's good.
Oh, that does sound interesting.
And then this book is interesting. It's called The Goal, and the ball doesn't go in by chance. What's interesting about this is written by an executive from FC Barcelona. And it's really about the business of running a football club. One of the things that stuck out to me is back in the day, they'd pick up these players, and the player may have a wife, a few kids, and they literally would just be like show up at the practice field. And the player has got drama at home because he hasn't sorted out where he's going to live, where the kids are going to go to
Yeah, yeah,
school, and but now it's just like it's a whole process, right? The whole team is involved in everything. Before they even sign the player, they're like, here's where you're going to live. They eliminate all these problems so the player just can think about
so
soccer, and that's what this book's about.
it's almost a concierge process that they kind of take care of everything involved in kids'
Yeah, 100%. And if you
education.
think about like modern tech companies like Apple and Google, right? Like they take care of everything: dry cleaning, daycare, food. You don't even have to go anywhere for lunch. So it's a really interesting process, and it's also a good reminder that even though these football teams are massive in scale and worth a lot of money, from a revenue generation standpoint, your local supermarket does more business than a football club. It's just
Yeah,
the scale of it is really interesting how they punch above their weight. But it's a fun book, the light read. Certainly will take you an hour to do so, and then you can get
and
back
it,
to the world.
and it's nice and thin.
Nice and thin. You can carry it with you anywhere, even on your bicycle. I watched this week Painkiller, which is on Netflix. It's about the Sackler family,
Ah,
opioids. Obviously, it's a well-known story. I think the acting in it, Matthew Broderick as Sackler, really interesting. And I don't know, but legalizing heroin, getting it through the FDA, I don't know, pretty wild process, but
and big bucks were generated, of course. I mean, we're talking
huge
huge.
bucks, like just like software, right? Like once you print one pill, it's pretty easy to build a billion of those, and
Yeah,
changing the doses and the marketing behind it and the sales effort. It's interesting in the States, pharmaceutical reps can go directly to doctors, encourage doctors to prescribe certain pills. And you can also take these doctors and entertain them and, make them
yeah.
feel good. And I don't know, some interesting psychology of human behavior, greed. So not the most uplifting
No, that
story, but
sounds interesting.
good to
And I
watch.
guess um, I think you know a little bit more about this than me, but it's crossed my screens this week. We've got a biopic coming out of Enzo Ferrari called Ferrari.
Correct. Michael Mann is directing. Michael Mann did Last Mohicans, Heat, Miami Vice. Great director. Excited about it. I just premiered at the Venice Film Festival, coming out in the States anyways, December 24th or 25th, right around Christmas. So
Right.
yeah, super excited. The trailer's out. Looks great. Everything you want. Italians, fast cars, beautiful women, great countryside. It also talks about bankruptcy and marketing, and
You
what a
just
story.
need to watch it with a nice plate of pasta and a chilled bottle of Suave.
Yeah, I mean, just like you had to go see Downton Abbey in period close, I think the same thing will be required, right? There's going to have to be some kind of red tablecloth, checkerboard tablecloth pasta meal following Ferrari for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot of green, white, and red sort of colours everywhere.
We'll have to get our boy Joe Frederini to subscribe or propose some
Uh,
wines we should have with our meal.
I mean, I know Enzo Ferrari is a fascinating character, quite a brutal dictatorship of an individual in some ways, the way he ran the business from all accounts. But it should be good. Should be a good subject.
Yeah, it'll be great. I think I'm super excited. Michael Mann is one of my favorite directors, so yeah, I'm excited to see that. All right, that was Ructions. I don't know. It was a lot of ructioning going on.
There was a lot of reasons not to be cheerful. So let's hope we can do better in 2 weeks' time.
All right, buddy. See you soon, man. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.